The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m. when Diego finished mopping the last section of the marble floor. The Harmony Concert Hall looked perfect now, ready for tomorrow's rehearsal. 3 years he had been working here, cleaning up after the rich people who came to their fancy events. 3 years of being invisible. He pushed his cart toward the storage room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The chandeliers cast long shadows across the walls, making everything look mysterious and quiet. Diego liked this time of night. No one bothered him. No one looked at him like he didn't belong. Earlier that evening, the hall had been packed with people in expensive clothes. The annual charity gala. Diego had watched from the corners as they laughed, danced, and showed off their jewelry. He wasn't bitter about it. Not really. It was just different worlds, that's all. The cleaning cart squeaked as he rolled it past the main entrance. Through the tall windows, he could see the city lights twinkling like stars. Cars moved slowly down the street below. Normal people going home from normal jobs. Diego envied them sometimes. At least they didn't have to pretend they didn't exist. He was almost at the storage room when he heard voices coming from the main hall. Strange. Everyone should have left by now. Diego paused, listening. Maybe someone forgot something. It happened. Sometimes. Rich people always left things behind, phones, purses, jewelry. The voices got louder. It sounded like an argument. Diego sighed and turned his cart around. Better check it out. If something was wrong, security would blame him for not reporting it. As he got closer to the main hall, he could make out what they were saying. A woman's voice, sharp and angry. "This is ridiculous. How hard is it to serve wine without spilling it everywhere?" Another voice, softer, trying to calm her down. "Come on, Victoria. It was an accident. Your dress will be fine." Victoria. Diego knew that name. Victoria Chen, daughter of the tech billionaire Robert Chen. She came to these events all the time, always complaining about something, always treating the staff like they were beneath her. Diego pushed open the service door just a crack and peered inside. Sure enough, there was Victoria standing near one of the round tables holding her dress out and examining a dark stain on the fabric. Her face was red with anger. A waiter stood nearby, looking terrified. Poor guy was probably new. Diego recognized the look, the panic of someone who knew they might lose their job over a simple mistake. "I'm so sorry, Miss Chen," the waiter was saying. "Please let me help clean it up." "Clean it up?" Victoria's voice rose higher. "This dress cost more than you make in 6 months. You can't just clean this up with a napkin." 3 other women stood around Victoria, all dressed in similar expensive outfits. They looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to leave but didn't know how. "Victoria, please," one of them said. This was Jessica Wong. Diego remembered her too. She was usually nicer than Victoria, at least to the staff. "It's not that bad. We can get it fixed." "It's not about the dress, Jessica." Victoria threw her hands up in the air. "It's about competence standards. Does anyone in this city have any real talent anymore? Any skill at all?" Diego felt bad for the waiter. The young man was standing there with his shoulders hunched, probably wishing he could disappear. Victoria continued her rant, getting louder and more dramatic. "Look around you. This is supposed to be a concert hall, a place for art, for music, for excellence. Instead, we get clumsy waiters and mediocre performances. When was the last time anyone here heard something that actually moved them? Something real?" Jessica exchanged glances with the other women. "Victoria, you're being a bit harsh. The violinist tonight was quite good." "Good?" Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Good is not enough. I'm talking about transcendent, life-changing. The kind of performance that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself." Diego found himself listening more carefully. Now, he understood what she meant, even if she was saying it in the most obnoxious way possible. Real music, the kind that reached into your chest and squeezed your heart, was rare. Most people had never experienced it. "You're impossible, Victoria," said another woman, this one with short blonde hair. "Your standards are so high. No one could ever meet them. You'd probably marry the first person who could actually impress you." The group laughed, but Victoria's eyes got a strange look in them. A look Diego had seen before, usually right before she did something dramatic and attention-seeking. You know what? Victoria walked toward the center of the room, her heels clicking on the marble floor. That's not a bad idea. What's not a bad idea? Jessica asked, following her. Victoria stopped in front of the stage where a beautiful black grand piano sat under the spotlight. The same piano where world-famous musicians had performed, where legends had been born. This, Victoria said, gesturing toward the piano with a flourish. I'm making a challenge, right here, right now. The other women looked at each other nervously. They knew Victoria well enough to recognize when she was about to do something outrageous. Victoria, Jessica said carefully, what kind of challenge? Victoria climbed the 3 steps onto the stage, her stained dress trailing behind her. She stood next to the piano, one hand resting on its polished surface. I want to hear something real, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. Something that actually matters. So here's my challenge. If anyone here can play something on this piano that truly moves me, something that touches my soul, I will marry them. Tonight. The women in the audience gasped. Even from his hiding spot by the door, Diego could see the shock on their faces. Victoria, you can't be serious, Jessica said. Dead serious, Victoria replied. I'm tired of mediocrity. I'm tired of fake emotion and pretend art. I want to hear something that makes me feel alive. And if someone can do that, I don't care who they are, where they come from, what they look like. I will marry them on the spot. But Victoria, the blonde woman said, there's no one else here. Just us and the staff. Victoria looked around the nearly empty hall. Her eyes swept past Diego's hiding spot without seeing him. Then I guess my standards really are too high, she said with a bitter smile. The waiter who had spilled the wine was still standing there, forgotten in all the drama. He looked confused and scared, probably wondering if he should leave or stay. Actually, Jessica said, there are a few other people still here. Some of the musicians from tonight's performance. They were packing up in the back rooms. Victoria's eyes lit up. Perfect. Go get them. Let's see if any of them can do better than their boring performance tonight. Jessica hesitated. Victoria, this is crazy. You can't just marry someone because they play piano well. Why not? Victoria demanded. People marry for money all the time. At least this way, I'd be marrying for something beautiful. Something real. Diego watched as Jessica reluctantly went to find the musicians. Part of him wanted to leave, to finish his cleaning and go home. This wasn't his business, these weren't his people. But something kept him there, crouched by the door, watching this strange scene unfold. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way Victoria had talked about real music, about something that could touch your soul. He understood that feeling, even if he'd buried it deep inside himself long ago. Within 10 minutes, Jessica returned with 3 men in tuxedos. They looked tired and confused, clearly not sure why they'd been asked to stay. Victoria explained her challenge again, and their expressions changed from confusion to disbelief to nervous excitement. The first musician, a violinist, tried to decline. Miss Chen, I don't think this is appropriate. Perhaps we should... Are you afraid? Victoria interrupted. Afraid you can't create something beautiful enough? That did it. Musicians had pride, after all. The violinist stepped forward. I'll need my instrument. No, Victoria said. Piano only. This is about pure music, not hiding behind familiar tools. The violinist looked uncomfortable. I don't really play piano at a professional level. Then I guess you're not the one, Victoria said with a shrug. One of the other musicians, a young man with dark hair, stepped forward. I'll try, he said. Diego watched as the young man sat down at the piano bench and placed his hands on the keys. He played a classical piece. Diego recognized it as something by Mozart. It was technically correct, even beautiful in its way. But it was safe. Predictable. The kind of thing you might hear in a hotel lobby. When he finished, Victoria shook her head. Lovely, but no, it didn't move me. The third musician tried next, playing something more modern, with jazz influences. Again, it was well executed, but it lacked the emotional punch Victoria was looking for. Is that it? Victoria asked, looking around. 3 classically trained musicians, and none of them can create something that touches the heart? The musicians looked embarrassed and frustrated. Diego didn't blame them. They were being put on the spot, asked to pour their souls out for the entertainment of a spoiled rich woman. Maybe, Jessica said gently, the problem isn't their playing. Maybe the problem is that you're looking for something that doesn't exist. Victoria's face hardened. It exists. I know it does. I've heard recordings, seen videos of performances that made people cry, made them change their lives. Real emotion, real art. It's out there. The first note hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Diego's fingers found their way across the keys as if no time had passed at all, as if 15 years hadn't gone by since he'd last played seriously. But as the melody began to take shape, the memories came flooding back. Not the good ones he'd hoped for, the painful ones, the ones he'd spent years trying to forget. Diego stopped playing abruptly, his hands pulling back from the keys as if they'd been burned. The half-formed melody died away, leaving only silence in the concert hall. What's wrong? Victoria asked from beside the piano. Her voice was softer now, less demanding than before. Diego stared down at his hands, working man's hands with calluses and small scars from years of cleaning and maintenance work. But underneath those marks, underneath the roughness, were the hands his mother had trained, the hands that had once held so much promise. I'm sorry, Diego said, starting to stand up from the bench. I can't, this was a mistake. Wait. Victoria's hand touched his shoulder, stopping him. Please, just tell me what happened just then. You started to play and it was beautiful, but then you stopped. Why? Diego looked up at her, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. This wasn't the same woman who'd been yelling about her dress 20 minutes ago. Something had changed. It's complicated, Diego said. I've got time, Victoria replied. She walked around to the front of the piano and leaned against it, her expensive dress forgotten. And honestly, after the scene I made tonight, I owe everyone here an explanation anyway. Maybe you owe me one too. The musicians had stopped packing. Jessica and the other women had sat down in the front row, clearly planning to stay and see how this strange evening would end. Even the waiter had found a spot to stand, no longer trying to escape. Diego looked around at all the expectant faces and felt a familiar panic rising in his chest. Too much attention, too many people waiting, for him to perform, to be something special. I should get back to work, he said. I still have to finish cleaning the building will still be here tomorrow, Victoria said. But this moment won't. Whatever just happened when you put your hands on those keys, it was real. I felt it too, even in those few seconds. Please, don't run away from it. Something in her tone reminded Diego of his mother. The same patient insistence, the same belief that music mattered more than fear or embarrassment. He closed his eyes and let himself remember her voice. Music is not just sound, mijo, she used to say. It's the language of the heart. When you play, you're speaking directly to people's souls. My mother taught me to play, Diego said quietly, his eyes still closed. Her name was Elena Martinez. She came here from Barcelona when she was 22, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a dream of playing with the city's symphony orchestra. He opened his eyes and looked at Victoria. She was listening intently, her arms crossed but her expression open. She was good, really good. But being good isn't always enough, especially when you're an immigrant with no connections and barely any money. The symphony already had their pianists, and the private music schools weren't interested in hiring someone without a fancy degree from an American conservatory. Diego's fingers traced the edge of the piano keys without pressing them down. So she did what she had to do. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, teaching beginner piano lessons during the day, and playing background music at a hotel restaurant on weekends. Whatever it took to pay the bills. That must have been difficult, Jessica said from the front row. Diego had almost forgotten the others were there. She never complained, Diego continued. Not once. Even when she was exhausted, Even when her hands were cracked from the cleaning chemicals, she'd still come home and play for me. She'd teach me everything she knew. He could see her so clearly in his mind. Elena Martinez, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair always pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that lit up whenever she heard music. She'd had hands like a bird, small and delicate but incredibly strong. I was 7 when she first put me on the piano bench, Diego said. I remember being annoyed because I wanted to watch TV instead. But she made it fun, turned everything into games. Before I knew it, I was playing simple songs, then harder ones, then pieces I'd heard her practice late at night when she thought I was asleep. You were a natural, Victoria said. It wasn't a question, I guess. Or maybe she was just that good of a teacher. Probably both. Diego smiled at the memory. By the time I was 10, I could play anything she put in front of me. Classical, jazz, pop songs from the radio. It all made sense to my fingers. He paused, remembering the pride in his mother's eyes when he'd master a particularly difficult piece. The way she'd hug him and call him her little maestro. She started entering me in competitions when I was 12, Diego continued. Local, ones at first, then regional, then state level. I won most of them. Not all, but most. Enough to get noticed. The hotel restaurant where Elena worked had a small stage area, and sometimes they'd let Diego perform on weekends. He remembered those nights clearly. The warm lights, the clatter of dinner conversation, and his mother watching from behind the bar with tears of joy in her eyes. By high school, I was getting serious attention. Music teachers were calling our apartment, offering scholarships and recommendations. My mom would stay up late helping me practice even after working all day. She'd make me hot chocolate and sit beside the piano, turning pages and giving me advice. It sounds wonderful, one of the women in the front row said. Diego's smile faded. It was until it wasn't. The hall grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, heavy with anticipation and dread. Senior year of high school, Diego said, his voice getting quieter. I'd been accepted to Juilliard with a full scholarship, full ride, tuition, room, board, everything. My mom was so proud she cried for 3 days straight. She called everyone she knew, told them her son was going to study at the most famous music school in the world. He could still remember the letter, the fancy letterhead, the words that had seemed like a golden ticket to everything they'd dreamed of. Elena had framed it and hung it on the kitchen wall next to a picture of Diego at his first piano competition. We had it all planned out, Diego continued. I was going to study performance and composition, maybe minor in music education so I could teach if performing didn't work out. Mom was going to quit 2 of her jobs and just focus on her hotel gig, since she wouldn't have to support me anymore. Victoria was still leaning against the piano, but her expression had grown serious. She seemed to sense where this story was heading. The graduation recital was in May. All the seniors who were going on to study music had to perform a solo piece. I chose Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece my mother used to play late at night when she thought no one was listening. Diego's hands moved to the keys again, but he didn't press down. Just let his fingers rest there, feeling the familiar weight and texture. I'd been practicing for months. Mom helped me every night, working through the difficult passages, helping me understand the emotion behind the notes. She told me stories about Rachmaninoff, about the depression and struggle that inspired the piece. Play it like your heart is breaking, she used to say, but also like you believe it will heal. The night of the recital came back to him in vivid detail. The school auditorium packed with families, teachers, and college representatives. Diego in his rented tuxedo, nervous but excited. Elena in the front row, wearing her best dress and practically glowing with pride. I played better that night than I ever had before, Diego said. Everything clicked. Every note, every phrase, every emotional moment. I could feel the audience with me, could feel them understanding what the music was trying to say. It was perfect. He paused, his throat tightening with the memory. And then, right as I hit the final chord, I heard this sound from the audience, like a gasp, but wrong somehow. I looked up and saw my mom. She was standing, But something was off. Her face was pale, and she was holding her chest. The silence in the concert hall was complete now. Even the city sounds from outside seemed to have stopped. She collapsed before I could get to her. Diego whispered. Heart attack. The paramedics said later that she'd probably been having symptoms, for weeks, maybe months, but had been hiding them. Didn't want to worry me during such an important time. Victoria's hand went to her throat. Diego. She lived for 3 days in the hospital, conscious but weak. The doctors said the damage was too severe. Her heart was just worn out. Too many years of working too hard, sleeping too little, worrying too much. Those 3 days had been the longest of Diego's life. Sitting beside Elena's hospital bed, holding her small hand and watching the monitors beep. She'd been more worried about him than herself, even then. The last thing she said to me, Diego continued, his voice barely audible now, that was, promise me you'll keep playing, mijo. The music is still in your hands. Don't let it die with me. He had to stop talking for a moment, overwhelmed by the memory of her voice, weak but still determined, still caring more about his future than her own pain. I promised, Diego said finally. But I didn't keep it. After the funeral, I couldn't even look at a piano. Every time I tried to play, all I could think about was that night, that moment when everything fell apart. Diego's hands trembled slightly as he placed them back on the keys. The weight of 15 years pressed down on his shoulders, but underneath that pressure, he felt something else stirring, something that had been sleeping for too long. Take your time, Victoria said softly. She had moved back to give him space, but her presence was still reassuring somehow. There's no rush. But Diego knew that wasn't true. If he waited too long, if he thought too much about what he was about to do, the fear would take over again. The memories would win. He had to trust his hands to remember what his mind had tried so hard to forget. He closed his eyes and let his fingers find the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece he'd played that night 15 years ago. The same piece his mother had loved so much. The first chord filled the concert hall with rich, deep sound. Even on its own, that single chord carried weight, emotion, history. Diego felt something shift inside his chest, like a door that had been locked for years finally creaking open. He played the opening passage slowly, carefully, letting each note resonate fully before moving to the next. This wasn't the full orchestral version. He was adapting it for solo piano, the way his mother had taught him to do. Taking the essential melodies and harmonies and making them sing without the support of violins and cellos and horns. The melody began to emerge, haunting and beautiful. But as Diego played, he realized something had changed from that night 15 years ago. The music felt different now, deeper somehow. The boy who had played this piece in high school had understood its technical challenges, had captured its beauty. But the man playing it now understood its pain. Every note carried the weight of loss. Every phrase spoke of dreams deferred, of promises broken and kept. The music wasn't just about Rachmaninoff's depression anymore. It was about Elena's sacrifices, about Diego's years in exile from the thing he loved most, about the courage it took to come back to something that had once caused so much pain. Victoria stood frozen beside the piano, her eyes wide. She had asked for something that would move her, something real and transcendent. But she hadn't expected this. The janitor she'd barely noticed for 3 years was playing with the skill of a concert master. More than that, he was playing with the soul of someone who had lived through genuine loss and found his way back to beauty. The other people in the hall were equally transfixed. Jessica had tears streaming down her face. The musicians who had played earlier looked stunned, recognizing immediately that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the young waiter who had started this whole chain of events stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Diego let the music carry him deeper into the performance. His hands moved across the keys with increasing confidence, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. The years melted away, and he was back in his mother's small apartment, playing while she cooked dinner, while she graded her students' work, while she mended his clothes late at night. But he was also fully present in this moment, in this concert hall, playing for this strange group of people who had become his unexpected audience. The music bridged the gap between past and present, between the boy he had been and the man he had become. The piece built toward its first major climax, and Diego let his emotions pour into the keys. All the grief he'd carried for 15 years, all the regret and loss and longing, but also hope, also love, also the incredible joy of reconnecting with something that had always been part of his soul. Victoria found herself holding her breath. She had grown up wealthy, surrounded by culture and refinement. She had been to hundreds of concerts, heard world-famous pianists perform in the most prestigious venues. But she had never heard anything like this. This wasn't just technically perfect playing, though it was certainly that. Diego's fingers moved with precision and grace, handling the most difficult passages with ease. But what made it extraordinary was the emotion behind every note. This was a man playing his life story, sharing his heart with a room full of strangers. As the music swelled around them, Victoria began to understand something about herself that she had never recognized before. All her wealth, all her privilege, all her demands for excellence and beauty, they had been a search for something she couldn't name, something she had never actually experienced until this moment. Authenticity. Truth. The kind of genuine emotion that couldn't be bought or performed. Or faked. Diego moved into the second movement of the concerto, and the music became more intimate, more personal. This was the section his mother had always said was about hope, fighting against despair, about finding light in the darkest moments. His left hand provided a steady, gentle accompaniment while his right hand sang the melody with heartbreaking tenderness. This was the sound of someone who had been broken and had healed, someone who had lost everything and found a way to be grateful for what remained. Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue, not caring that her makeup was ruining. She had known Victoria for years, had watched her friend search for meaning in shopping and parties and dramatic gestures, but she had never seen Victoria look the way she looked now. Completely absorbed, completely present, completely moved by something outside herself. The musicians in the back were whispering to each other, trying to figure out who Diego was, where he had studied, how someone with his obvious talent had ended up working as a janitor. But their questions seemed irrelevant now. What mattered wasn't his credentials or his background. What mattered was the music flowing from his hands like water from a spring. Diego entered the final movement, and the music became more urgent, more powerful. This was the section about triumph, about emerging from darkness into light, about keeping promises even when it seemed impossible. His hands flew across the keys with increasing intensity, building toward the climactic finale. The sound filled every corner of the concert hall, rich and full and overwhelming. But it wasn't overwhelming in a harsh way. It was overwhelming like standing in front of the ocean or looking up at a sky full of stars. Overwhelming in a way that made you feel both small and infinite at the same time. Victoria felt something breaking open in her chest. All her life, she had been searching for this feeling without knowing what it was. She had traveled the world, bought beautiful things, surrounded herself with luxury and culture, but none of it had ever made her feel the way Diego's playing made her feel right now. This was what she had been looking for when she made her ridiculous challenge. This moment of pure connection, of understanding something beautiful and true. Not the surface beauty of expensive clothes or perfect technique, but the deep beauty of a human soul sharing itself through art. As Diego approached the final passages, he felt his mother's presence with him, not in a sad way, not as a reminder of loss, but as a celebration of everything she had given him. Her love, her sacrifice, her belief in the power of music to heal and transform and connect people across all the barriers that usually kept them apart. He played the final climactic section with everything he had, his whole body involved in creating the sound. The music demanded it. This wasn't the kind of piece you could play sitting perfectly still. It required passion, commitment, the willingness to be vulnerable in front of strangers. The last notes rang out in the silence of the concert hall, hanging in the air like a question that had finally been answered. Diego's hands stayed on the keys for a moment, not wanting to break the connection. Then slowly he lifted them and placed them in his lap. The silence that followed was complete. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the sounds from the street outside seemed to have stopped, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Diego looked up at Victoria, suddenly afraid of what he might see in her face. Had he succeeded? Had he played something that truly moved her? Or was this just another performance that fell short of her impossible standards? What he saw in her expression surprised him. Victoria Chen, the woman who prided herself on being unimpressed by everything, was crying. Not delicate, ladylike tears, but real sobs that shook her whole body. She stood next to the piano with her hands pressed to her face, completely overcome. "That was—" she began, then stopped, unable to find words. Jessica was the first to break, the spell starting to applaud. The sound of her clapping seemed to wake everyone else up, and suddenly the small audience was on their feet, applauding wildly. The musicians who had played earlier looked at Diego with new respect, recognizing that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. But Diego barely heard the applause. He was watching Victoria, still crying, still struggling to compose herself. He had done what she asked. He had played something real, something that moved her. The question now was what happened next. "I can't believe," Victoria said, her voice shaky with emotion, "that you've been here for 3 years, and I never knew. I never saw you, never really looked at you, never imagined that someone so talented so—" She trailed off again, overwhelmed. "It's okay," Diego said gently. "I wasn't ready to be seen. Not until tonight." Victoria laughed through her tears, a sound that was half joy and half disbelief. "I made that ridiculous challenge as a joke, as a way to prove that no one could meet my standards, that nothing real existed anymore." 3 weeks had passed since that extraordinary night at the concert hall, and Victoria Chen found herself in a place she had never been before, completely unsure of how to proceed with her own life. She sat in her luxury apartment, surrounded by expensive furniture and artwork that suddenly seemed meaningless, staring at a business card that had arrived in her mail that morning. "Diego Martinez, piano instruction and performance," it read, with a simple phone number below. After their encounter, Diego had quietly gone back to his janitorial duties, finishing his shift as if nothing world-changing had happened. Victoria had wanted to stay, to talk more, to understand this man who had just turned her world upside down with his playing. But Jessica had gently suggested they all leave, giving Diego space to process what had just occurred. "Call him tomorrow," Jessica had advised. "Let him absorb what happened tonight." But when Victoria had called the concert hall the next day, she was told that Diego had requested a few days off. Personal time, they said. She had waited impatiently for him to return. When he finally did, he seemed different. Not unfriendly, but more reserved. As if the vulnerability he had shown that night had scared him as much as it had moved her. Their first real conversation had happened in the concert hall's small employee break room. Victoria had arrived early, for a board meeting, hoping to catch Diego before his shift ended. She found him sitting at a table with a cup of coffee, reading a book about music theory. "Hi," she had said, suddenly feeling as nervous as a teenager asking someone to prom. Diego had looked up, surprised to see her in the employee area. "Miss Chen, is everything all right? Do you need something?" The formal distance in his voice had stung. After what they had shared, after the way he had opened his soul through music, he was back to calling her Miss Chen and treating her like just another wealthy patron. "I was hoping we could talk," Victoria had said, sitting down across from him without being invited. "About what happened the other night." Diego had closed his book and studied her face. "What about it?" "About getting to know each other better. Remember? You said we should do that before." She had gestured vaguely, not wanting to say the word marriage in case someone overheard. "I remember," Diego had said carefully. "But I've been thinking about that night, and I wonder if maybe we both got caught up in the emotion of the moment. You were looking for something dramatic, something that would prove a point. I was finally dealing with some old grief. Maybe what felt like a connection was really just what? Victoria had asked. Two people having intense experiences at the same time, but not necessarily together. The words had felt like a slap. Victoria was used to getting what she wanted when she wanted it. She was not used to being dismissed by someone she had offered to marry. But as the days passed, she found herself thinking about Diego's response more carefully. Maybe he was right to be cautious. Maybe she had been caught up in the drama of the moment. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that what she felt wasn't just excitement or infatuation. It was something deeper. For the first time in her privileged life, Victoria had encountered someone who was genuinely extraordinary. Not extraordinary because of wealth or fame or social connections, but extraordinary in the ways that actually mattered. Diego had talent, depth, integrity, and a kind of quiet strength that came from surviving real hardship. And he didn't want anything from her. That alone made him unlike anyone she had ever known. So Victoria had done something completely out of character. She had started learning about Diego's world instead of expecting him to adapt to hers. She began attending concerts at smaller venues around the city, places where working musicians played for audiences who came for the music rather than to be seen. She read books about classical music, about the lives of composers, about the technical aspects of piano performance. She even started taking piano lessons herself, though her adult fingers struggled with pieces that Diego could probably play in his sleep. And slowly, carefully, she began building a genuine friendship with the man who had changed her perspective on everything. They met for coffee sometimes, always at Diego's suggestion, and always at modest places near his neighborhood, rather than the expensive cafes Victoria usually frequented. They talked about music, about books, about their very different upbringings. Victoria learned about Diego's childhood, about the sacrifices his mother had made, about the years he had spent working multiple jobs to get by. Diego learned about Victoria's loneliness, about growing up wealthy but emotionally isolated, about the pressure of being expected to represent her family's success while never developing her own identity or purpose. "I've never actually worked for anything," Victoria had admitted during one of their conversations. "Everything I have, everything I am, was just given to me because of who my parents are. Even my opinions about art and culture, I realize now that most of them came from other people telling me what was supposed to be good or important." Diego had listened without judgment, the way he seemed to listen to everything. "But you recognized something real when you heard it," he had pointed out. "That night at the concert hall, you knew the difference between music that was just technically correct and music that came from the heart. That has to count for something." "Does it?" Victoria had asked. "Or was I just desperate to feel something authentic for once in my life, and your playing happened to be in the right place at the right time?" It was a question that hung between them, unresolved, but not uncomfortable. They were both trying to figure out what was real and what was circumstance. Now, 3 weeks after that life-changing night, Victoria held Diego's business card and realized that something had shifted. The card represented Diego moving forward with his life, reclaiming his musical identity after 15 years of hiding from it, and Victoria found herself genuinely happy for him, even though it might mean he would need her less in his life. That realization surprised her. When had she started caring more about Diego's happiness than about her own desires? The answer came to her slowly. Somewhere in their careful courtship, in their long conversations and shared silences, Victoria had fallen in love. Not with the drama of that night at the concert hall, not with the romance of rescuing a hidden talent, but with Diego himself. With his kindness, his thoughtfulness, his refusal to let his difficult past make him bitter or cynical. She picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. "Hello?" Diego's voice was warm but cautious. "It's Victoria. I got your card." "Oh. Hi." A pause. "What did you think?" "I think it's beautiful, simple and elegant. Very you." Another pause. "I wanted to tell you in person, but I wasn't sure when." "I'd see you next." I've decided to start teaching again and maybe eventually performing. Small venues at first, but that's wonderful, Victoria said and meant it. Your mother would be so proud. I hope so. I've been practicing every day, getting my technique back up to where it used to be. It's like learning to walk again, but the muscle memory is still there. Victoria smiled. Where are you practicing? There's a small church near my apartment that lets me use their piano in the evenings. The acoustics aren't as good as the concert hall, but it's quiet and the pastor doesn't mind if I stay late. Would you? Victoria started, then stopped. She had been about to offer to buy him a piano, or rent him studio space, or solve his problem with money the way she solved everything else. But she caught herself. That wasn't what he needed from her. Would I what? Diego prompted. Would you like some company sometime? I've been taking piano lessons myself. Very basic stuff. But I thought maybe I could understand your music better if I tried to learn how it works. This pause was longer than the others. You've been taking piano lessons? For 2 weeks now. I can play Mary Had a Little Lamb and about half of a simplified version of Für Elise. It's humbling, realizing how much skill and practice goes into making something that sounds effortless. Diego laughed, and the sound made Victoria's heart flutter in a way that expensive jewelry and fancy cars never had. I'd like that, he said. Company, I mean. And I'd be happy to help with your lessons if you want. Your teacher might not appreciate the interference, but I could show you some exercises that might help with finger independence. My teacher is a very patient 60-year-old woman named Mrs. Patterson, who keeps encouraging me to try chopsticks. I think she'd welcome some backup. They made plans to meet at the church that evening. After Victoria hung up, she realized she felt nervous in a way she hadn't experienced since she was a child. Not the social anxiety of worrying about saying the right thing at a party, but the deeper nervousness of caring about someone's opinion of you, of wanting to be worthy of their time and attention. That evening, Victoria arrived at the small church carrying a bag of takeout food from a modest restaurant near Diego's neighborhood. She had thought about bringing something fancy, something from one of the high-end places she usually frequented, but had decided against it. This wasn't about impressing Diego with her wealth. This was about sharing a simple meal with someone she cared about. She found Diego in the church sanctuary, seated at an old upright piano that had seen better days. His hands moved across the keys with the fluid. 6 months later, Victoria Chen stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, her heart pounding with nervous excitement that had nothing to do with her own performance. Tonight wasn't about her. Tonight was about Diego, and the journey that had brought them both to this moment. The program in her hands read, Diego Martinez, A Return to Music. It was sold out, every seat filled with people who had heard about the janitor-turned-pianist whose story had captured the city's imagination. But Victoria knew that for Diego, the size of the audience didn't matter as much as the fact that he was finally ready to share his gift with the world again. 5 minutes, Mr. Martinez, a stage manager whispered as he passed by. Victoria turned to see Diego adjusting his bow tie for the 3rd time in as many minutes. He looked handsome in his formal concert attire, but she could see the nerves in the set of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. Hey, she said softly, approaching him. How are you feeling? Diego managed to smile. Terrified, excited, grateful, all at the same time. That sounds about right for tonight. Victoria reached up and smoothed his lapels, a gesture that had become natural between them over the months they'd been together. Remember what you told me when I was nervous about playing for Mrs. Patterson's recital? That the music doesn't care if you're nervous, Diego recited. It just wants to be shared. Exactly. And you have so much beautiful music to share. Their relationship had developed slowly and carefully over the past 6 months. Both of them determined to build something real, rather than just riding the emotional high of their dramatic first meeting. Victoria had insisted on couples counseling, early on, wanting to make sure they were dealing with the very real differences in their backgrounds and life experiences. I don't want to be another rich person who thinks love can overcome everything without doing the actual work, she had told Diego after their 3rd date. If we're going to do this, I want to do it right. The counseling had helped them navigate some difficult conversations about money, about family expectations, about the ways Victoria's wealth might overshadow Diego's accomplishments if they weren't careful, about Diego's fear of being seen as someone who was using Victoria for her connections, about Victoria's fear that she might unconsciously expect Diego to be grateful for her help, rather than seeing their relationship as a true partnership. But through all those conversations, their core connection had only grown stronger. Victoria had discovered that Diego's gentleness wasn't weakness but incredible strength. Diego had learned that Victoria's wealth didn't have to define her if she chose to define herself differently. Tonight's concert was the culmination of months of preparation. After that evening at the church when they'd confessed their love for each other, Diego had thrown himself into practice with renewed dedication. Victoria had used her connections carefully, not to buy Diego's success, but to make sure the right people heard about his talent. She had arranged for him to audition for Marcus Thompson, one of the most respected classical music agents in the city. But she had done it quietly, letting Marcus discover Diego's abilities without knowing about Victoria's involvement until after he'd already decided to represent him. "I don't care if he's dating the Queen of England," Marcus had told his assistant after Diego's audition. "This man is the real deal. We need to get him performing." The months of preparation had been intense, but joyful. Diego practiced 4 to 6 hours a day, rebuilding the stamina and technique needed for professional performance. Victoria often sat in the practice rooms, reading or working on her laptop while Diego played, both of them comfortable with each other's presence. She had also been busy with her own transformation. Inspired by Diego's courage in pursuing his true calling, Victoria had started questioning what she actually wanted to do with her life. The answer had surprised her. "I want to help other people find their way back to things they've given up on," she had told Diego one evening. "There are so many people out there who have buried their dreams because of circumstances, because of fear, because they think it's too late. I want to use my resources to give them second chances." The Victoria Chen Foundation for Second Chances had been born from that conversation. It provided scholarships for adult students returning to education, grants for artists who had put their creative work aside for financial survival, and support for people starting over after major life changes. Victoria threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had once brought to shopping and social events, but this time her efforts had purpose beyond her own satisfaction. Diego's debut had been scheduled for a smaller venue initially, but word of mouth had been so strong that they'd had to move to progressively larger halls. When Carnegie Hall had a last-minute cancellation, Marcus had suggested they take the slot. "Are you sure?" Diego had asked Victoria when she'd brought him the news. "Carnegie Hall it's Carnegie Hall." "You're ready," Victoria had assured him. "And if you're not ready for Carnegie Hall, where would you be ready?" Now, standing in the wings with the sounds of the expectant audience filtering through the curtain, Diego took a deep breath and looked at Victoria. "I keep thinking about that night at the concert hall," he said. "About how angry you were, how I almost didn't have the courage to try. If you hadn't made that ridiculous challenge. If I hadn't been a spoiled brat throwing a tantrum," Victoria corrected with a smile. "If you hadn't been brave enough to ask for something real," Diego said firmly. "Even if you didn't know exactly what you were asking for." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. Over the months they'd been together, Diego had helped her see herself differently. Not as the shallow, privileged woman she had always assumed she was, but as someone who had been searching for meaning and authenticity, even when she didn't know how to find it. "2 minutes, Mr. Martinez." Diego nodded to the stage manager, then turned back to Victoria. From his pocket he pulled a small velvet box. "Diego," Victoria gasped. "What are you—" "I know this isn't the traditional way to do this," Diego said quickly. "And I know we haven't talked about timing, but standing here, about to walk onto the stage where some of the greatest musicians in history have performed, I realized something." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, not the enormous diamond Victoria might have expected given her family's wealth, but a delicate band set with a stone that caught the backstage lights and threw them back in rainbow patterns. "I realize that none of this, not the music, not the career, not even this moment, means anything if I can't share it with you." You've made me brave enough to dream again, Victoria. Will you marry me? Victoria stared at the ring, then at Diego's face, seeing the love and hope and vulnerability there. 6 months ago, a proposal from a man she'd known for less than an hour had been a joke, a dramatic gesture meant to prove a point about her impossible standards. This proposal was the opposite of everything that night had represented. This was quiet, sincere, built on months of getting to know each other's hearts and minds. This was real. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. Diego slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that was interrupted by the stage manager clearing his throat. Mr. Martinez? It's time. Diego and Victoria broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time. Go, Victoria said, giving him a gentle push toward the stage. Go share your gift with the world. I'll be right here when you're done. I love you, Diego said. I love you too. Now go play. Victoria watched from the wings as Diego walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage to thunderous applause. The audience was on their feet before he'd even reached the piano bench, responding to the story they'd heard about the janitor who'd rediscovered his calling. But Victoria knew that Diego's story wasn't really about a janitor becoming a musician. It was about a man who had learned to trust his heart again, who had found the courage to share his gifts despite the risk of vulnerability and loss. As Diego sat down at the magnificent concert grand piano and placed his hands on the keys, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. It had started with her tantrum about a stained dress, her ridiculous challenge born from frustration and loneliness. But it had become something neither of them had expected, a love story built on mutual growth, on seeing the best in each other, on having the courage to become better versions of themselves. Diego began to play, and from the first note, Victoria knew this performance would be different from that night at the concert hall 6 months ago. That night, Diego had played with the raw emotion of someone rediscovering a lost part of himself. Tonight, he played with the joy of someone who had found not just his music again, but his place in the world. The piece he had chosen to open with was the same Rachmaninoff concerto he had played that first night, but his interpretation had evolved. Where there had once been pain and longing, there was now hope and celebration. The music spoke of loss, yes, but also of recovery, of love found and promises kept. Victoria watched the audience respond to Diego's playing, seeing the same wonder and emotion on their faces that she had felt that night 6 months ago. But now she understood something she hadn't then. The magic wasn't just in Diego's technical skill or even his emotional